Howdy ho, Andrew, aka Calfear, aka Shadowsin here. Welcome to the Onion Buns and welcome to another episode of Tales of Neverwinter Nights. So we're going to finish off with the final story for now of the roleplay that was going on between Marvelin and Keith, Knights of the Eternal Flame. And we have a story this week from Sir Bardolph, previous AGM of the Knights of the Eternal Flame. As I said, this was an ongoing roleplay between Marvelin and that guild. So this will be the final story for now. I don't know if there's more in the future, but this will be the final story for now of that roleplay. So yeah, let's get to it. Enslaved by Sir Bardolph, previous AGM of the Knights of the Eternal Flame. From the personal journal of Bardolph de Bocage, past AGM of Knights of the Eternal Flame. I have attempted to put to words the experiences that I undertook during the time that I served as a slave to the Drow priestess Marvelin. Much of that time is now murky in my mind. Perhaps Tyr, in his mercy, has done this to spare me from the pain of the full recollection. It started when my brethren began, for reasons best unknown to me, to wager with a certain priestess of Loth, instead of putting her to the sword, as a minion of evil is oft wont to do. She preyed upon the young in the order, tempting them with the sins of lust and of the pleasures of flesh. Thus their minds were unclear, and they did fall to her in battle. Word soon reached me that two of my older fellow knights, Sir Camarus and Sir Kingswill, had lost a skirmish with her and were now enslaved and paraded about with ornate collars about their necks. I knew little of Kingswill, albeit that he was the current warlord of Camarus. Also little was known he was wed to the Lady Evangelist, another Keith knight. Sending word to the Temperess, I was able to parley with her for their freedom. The price, Tyr protect me, was me. I was to willingly serve as her slave in exchange for their freedom. At that time, I held the rank of AGM in the order, second only to Sir Huma Dragonsbane. Thus, I felt it was my duty and responsibility to obtain their freedom at whatever cost. In reflection, I now acknowledge that I had very little concern for my own life, for it had become very barren and lonely. My bride of just 2 months, the lovely Beltane of Gwyneth, had departed on another crusade, and I had no word from her. I had lived those prior 40 years without the stirrings of Cupid in my life, but I had become consumed by passion when Belle entered my life. Upon her abrupt leaving, I found I had no taste for battle or any of my other duties. As surely as she had revived me upon her declaration of love for me and our subsequent marriage, her departure had broken my spirit and left me a shell of my former self. I was of this mind when I turned myself over to Marvelin. I cared not for what she did to me. If it brought a bit of happiness to Kingswill and Camarus and Evan, the jeweled collar was placed about my neck, and I was debased in ways that destroyed what little personal dignity I had of my person and my spirit. The followers of Loth wield their tools very effectively, and many were the personal humiliations that were placed upon my body and my soul. I was stripped literally of my rank and finery, and forced to move about in a mere loincloth. At first I was embarrassed, but later I stopped caring about the laughs and comments made by Marvelin's guests, male and female. They delighted in bringing forth my personal demons and flaunting my human frailties in front of their assemblies. Although I was never physically abused, theirs were much more subtle and sublime forms of torture. Prior to my enslavement, never had I had my dark side brought forth before me. Many were the passions and acts that I partook of, and great was the laughing of Marvelin's guests at the humiliation of the great Keith Knight, now reduced to a mere slave. This humiliation ate at my very soul, and I began to pray for either rescue or death. Word then reached me that I was to be given to Marvelin's matron, the Drowess known as Jazra Dark, for she wished the company of a Keith Knight for one night of her dark passions. I was then to be given to another of her daughters, to be disposed of as she wished. Each night, when I was released from my duties and allowed to return to my cell, I prayed to Tyr for salvation. My body had failed me, and all I had remaining was my faith. It was no surprise then when Marvelin summoned me before her one afternoon. I fully expected to be delivered into Jazra's hands, to suffer the tender mercies that their kind love to inflict upon our order. Imagine my surprise when, after a brief conversation, Marvelin released me from my bondage. I glimpsed perhaps a small part of humanity that remained in her, as she showed me mercy. My finery and armor was given to me, and after perhaps a bittersweet farewell, I rode forth on my warhorse from Marvelin's cottage in the woods, and returned with all haste to the Keith Keep. Upon reflection, I now realized that I had perhaps begun to have feelings for the Drowess Marvelin. It is this shame, the betrayal of my vows to Bel, that I will have to live with for my remaining years. Of my feelings, no one in the order have I told, for they would surely cast me out of the order for consorting with evil, and they would be right to do so. Shortly thereafter, I tendered my resignation as AGM and have gone into seclusion in a little used portion of the keep. Still no word reaches me of Bel, whether she lives or has perished upon the field of battle. I now ponder, perhaps packing up my few remaining personal belongings and setting forth on one final quest to find her. From such a quest, I would either return to her or not return at all. As of the date of this entry, I have not reached that decision yet. Most of the knights I served with are gone, but a few of them still ask of my advice, so I remain to give what little help I can. I find myself not wanting company, though, and remain in my chambers most of the time. As to my future, only Tyr, our beloved patron god of justice, knows. By mine own hand this day, January 28th, mundane year, 1996. Sir Bardolph de Beaucage, Knight of the Eternal Flame. And that ends the roleplay that was going on between Marvelin and Keith that I'm aware of. There may be more writings down the road that I haven't read, and if so. Interesting side note. I didn't know any of this when I was playing, but the date reminded me of something. There was I played Shadowsin, and I was a PvP fanatic. There's no other way to put it. Whether I was playing Calfear for Core or Shadowsin for Temple of Loth, 90% of the time you found me in PvP. And Drathsin would join me, and we'd go into the Lost Hills, as I'd told many a times. And when you went into the Lost Hills, very early in, there was this hut, and that's where they did the free-for-all, and it was just, it'd be over and over and over, and that was never my scene, the free-for-all. I much preferred going deeper into the woods and setting up a jump point. And what I mean by that is Neverwinter Nights was turn-based, and it was using the old SSI Gold Box, AD&D Gold Box Games engine. So you would, with a keyboard, you'd one square at a time. And if you go on a square, it would sometimes initiate combat, and that would pop up and you would enter the combat map. So when I say a jump point, what would happen is a group would come through, and they'd trigger a combat. And they'd be in combat with the monsters, because you could not just do player versus player, because player versus player actually was never intended for Neverwinter Nights. So you would have to queue a combat with monsters, and then you could do player versus player, but you still had to deal with the monsters. So people would trigger this, the monsters would jump up, you'd enter the combat screen, and then Drathsin and I would jump in. And then the PvP would start. And that was the PvP I enjoyed. And there was one particular day, and I dare say it was probably about 1996, that Drassen and I cycled through the entire Keef guild. Every last one of them. We killed every last one of them. And one of my biggest regrets is because we're going through people's writings, and I wish I had this writing. I don't. But I believe it was Keef Bard was the name, but don't quote me on that. And like I said, we were out there all day, and Keef was sending their entire guild out after us to try to kill us. And we killed off every single member of Keef guild that was online, obviously. And the next day, there was a post by Keef Bard, and it was a gorgeous post where he wrote a story of the Sin Brothers. And like, it was one of the best role play stories I had ever read in my life. And granted, it was an ego stroke to me and Drassen because, Drassen, we were the Sin Brothers. But it was an acknowledgement from another player. We had done what nobody believed, and we didn't set out to do it. Like, we weren't picking on Keef. Anyone triggered our jump point, we would jump in and have the PvP battle. It just so happened that we jumped some Keef. They sent out a call to arms, and the rest of the guild showed up. And it was like, you could only, like in Neverwinter Nights, you could only have 8 people in a combat. So it wasn't like the whole guild could enter into the combat against 2, but 6 would be in, and then there'd be us 2, and we were winning. And I dare say this is about the right time that this happened while this roleplay was going on with Mauve with their ex-GM, or ex-AGM. So I didn't know the dates or anything, but it's, then there's no way to figure it out, but I would love to know. I would love to know if it happened at the same time, because that's just symmetry. That's just beautiful symmetry. There's no other way to put it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that writing. And that's the video for this week. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, a subscribe, and a share. I'm trying to grow my channel, and a like, a subscribe, and a share does me wonders, and I do appreciate it. Takes 1 second to subscribe. Costs you absolutely nothing. Helps me immensely. Just hit the subscribe button on the bottom of the screen. If you're watching this on Rumble, please follow my channel. Always feel free to leave a comment. I encourage everybody to leave a comment. Not only does it get us interacting, it really does help me with the YouTube algorithm and getting more eyes on the videos. And as always, pew 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 and shit. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.